So today we're going to be reviewing what we did yesterday and also adding another piece. So to begin, we're going to start reviewing the distributive property. So in the first set of review examples, part A, use the distributive property to multiply the following. So first I'm going to multiply x times x, which gives me x squared. X times 2 would give me a positive 2x. Part B, 2x times x gives me 2x squared. Remember, you're adding the exponents. The 2x has that invisible 1 for an exponent, and the x inside has 1 for an exponent, so we are adding those two exponents. 2x times negative 3 gives us negative 6x. For example C, t squared times t gives me t cubed. Remember, you're adding the exponents. T squared times 4 would give me a positive 4t squared. For D, 4x squared, or 4x times 2x will give me 8x squared. 4x times 1 would give me a positive 4x. For the next part of review examples, we're going to use the distributive property in reverse like we did yesterday. We're going to factor out a common monomial, the greatest common factor. So the first thing we did yesterday was we looked at our coefficients in front of our variables. We listed all of the factors that go into those coefficients. So for example A, the factors of 1 are just 1 times 1. For 4, I have 1 times 4, and I also have 2 times 2. The greatest factor that goes into each of those was 1, so I can pull a 1 out. It's not necessary to write 1, but we're going to write it. For my variables, I have an x squared and I have an x. Remember yesterday we said we always take out the variable with the smallest exponent. In this case, it would just be an x. Now we have to see what's left over and write it in parentheses. 1 times 1 will give me my 1 back. There was 2 x's. I took 1 out, so there's an x left over. 1 times what gives me negative 4? That would be negative 4. There was an x. I took an x away, so there's no x's left. Remember to check your answers. You can redistribute. 1x times 1x is 1x squared. 1x times negative 4 is negative 4x. When I redistributed, I got the same as my original problem, so I know I did it correctly. For example B, I have a 3x squared minus 9x. The factors of 3 are 1 times 3, and my factors of 9 are 1 and 9, 3 and 3. The greatest factor in each is 3, so I can pull out a 3. I have an x squared and an x. The variable with the smallest exponent is just x, so I can pull an x out of each term. Now we have to see what's left over. 3 times what gives me 3 back? The answer is 1. There was 2 x's. I took 1 away, so there's 1 x left over. Now I have to see 3 times what will give me a negative 9. Well, that would be negative 3, because 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. I had an x, but I pulled 1 out, so there's no x's left over. For example C, I have t cubed plus 5t squared. Factors of 1 are just 1 and 1. My factors of 5 are 1 and 5. The greatest factor in each is 1. I have t cubed and t squared. The variable with the smallest exponent would be t squared, so that is what I can pull out. So now to see what's left over, 1 times 1 gives me 1. There was 3 t's. I took 2 out, so that means I have 1 t left over. Now I ask 1 times what will give me a positive 5, and the answer is 5. 1 times 5 is 5. There were 2 t's to start. I took 2 out, so there are no t's left over. For the last example, for review from yesterday, I write my factors of each of the terms, or coefficients, 10 and 2. My factors of 10 are 1 and 10, 2 and 5. The factors of 2 are just 1 and 2. The greatest factor that goes into each number would be 2, so I will pull a 2 out. I have x squared and x. The most x's I can take out of each term is 1. Now I see what's left over. I ask 2 times what will give me 10? The answer is 5. There were 2 x's. I took 1 out, so there's 1 x left. So now I'm on to the second term. 2 times what will give me 2? The answer is 1. There was an x to start. I took 1 out, so there are no x's left over. So what we're doing today is we're going to build off of what we did yesterday. So if we move down on our paper, the directions say solving after factoring out the greatest common factor. So after taking out the greatest common factor of each equation, we're going to set each of the factors equal to 0 and solve for the zeros of the function. Just by glancing at all of the examples below, the difference between these problems and the ones we did above and yesterday are that we are now dealing with equations instead of expressions. When we have an equation, we have to solve it. So if I look at the first example, we begin each problem in the same way we did yesterday. First, we're going to look at the coefficients. So my factors of 1 are 1 and 1. My factors of 3 are 1 and 3. The greatest common factor is 1, so I can pull a 1 out. Now I look at my variables. I have an x squared and an x. I can pull an x out because that's the variable with the smallest exponent. Now we see what's left over. 1 times 1 will give me my 1 back. I had 2 x's, I took 1 out, so there's 1 x left over. Now I ask 1 times what will give me 3? The answer is 3. I had 1 x, I took it out, there are no x's left. Now we have an equation, we have to set it equal to 0, like it did in the original problem. So now the new part, if you want to make a note off to the side, we're going to be dealing with what's called the zero product property. So let's say I have 2 numbers, any 2 numbers. We're going to call them A and B. If I have A times B is equal to 0, what do we know about either A or B? We know that one of them has to be 0, because in order for 2 numbers being multiplied together to equal 0, one of the terms has to be 0. So we're going to be applying that to our example problem over here. I have 1x being multiplied by the quantity 1x plus 3. I don't know which one of those terms is going to be 0, so I'm going to set both of them equal to 0 and solve for x. So I'm going to create a little chart or table. I'm going to set 1x equal to 0, and then on this side I'm going to set my x plus 3 equal to 0. Now we solve our 1, or sometimes later on we'll get a two-step equation. The inverse of multiplying by 1 is dividing by 1. So I'm going to divide by 1 on each side. 0 divided by 1 is 0. So I get x equals 0. So the left side of this expression is going to equal 0. Now if I go to the right side, I have x plus 3 equals 0. The inverse of adding 3 is subtracting. So I'm going to subtract 3 on each side. 0 minus 3 gives me negative 3. I have two solutions to this equation. It's a quadratic equation. And my two solutions are x equals 0 and x equals negative 3. Now let's try number 3. So I'm going to skip to number 3. 8 and 4 are my coefficients. My factors of 8 are 1 and 8, 2 and 4. My factors of 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. The greatest common factor is 4. I could pull a 4 out of each term. I have b squared and b, so the most b's I can take out is 1. Now I have to see what's left over. 4 times what gives us 8? 2. There was 2 b's to start. I took 1 out, so there is 1 b left over. Now we have to get our second term. We ask 4 times what will give us negative 4? Negative 1. There was 1 b. I took 1 out, so there's no b's left. Remember, now that we're solving, it's equal to 0. We have an equation. We need to solve for our values. So I'm going to make a table and set each factor equal to 0. So on the left here, I have 4b equals 0. And on the right, I'll have 2b minus 1 equals 0. Solve for b. So on the left, the inverse of multiplying by 4 is dividing by 4. 0 divided by 4 gives me 0. On the right side, to solve for b, first I do the inverse of subtraction, which is addition. So I add 1 to each side. 2b equals 0 plus 1 is 1. The inverse of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2 on each side. So I have b is equal to 1 divided by 2, which is 1/2. So my two solutions are b equals 0 and b equals 1/2. Now let's skip ahead and try example number 10. So first thing we do is we list our factors. So our factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Factors of 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. The greatest common factor in each term is 2, so I will take out a 2. I have x squared and x, so the most x's I can take out is 1. Now we have to see what's left over. So 2 times what gives me 6? 3. 2 times 3 gives me 6. I had 2 x's, I took 1 away, so there's 1 x left over. Now we have to get our second term. 2 times what gives me negative 4? The answer is negative 2. There was an x, I took 1 out, there's no x's left. It's an equation, so we have to set it equal to 0. So now I have to solve for my x's. So I'll set the left factor equal to 0, 2x equals 0, and I'll set the right side equal to 0. 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. Solve each side. So the inverse of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. On the right side, the inverse of subtracting 2 is adding 2. So now I have 3x is equal to 2, because 0 plus 2 is 2. Now the inverse of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. So 2 divided by 3, we're going to leave that as a fraction. I don't want a rounded decimal. So my solutions are x equals 0 and x equals 2/3. The last example I want to do with you, just to show you one of every kind, is number 12. So for number 12, the first thing we're going to do is go through and list all of the factors. So my factors of 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. My factors of 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. The greatest factor in each term is 2. What makes this problem a tiny bit different is each of the coefficients is negative. I have a negative 18 minus 4. So I can pull a negative 2 out of each term. Now I have an x squared and an x, so I can only pull one x out. Now we see what's left over. Negative 2 times what gives us 18? Negative 18. The answer is 9. Negative 2 times 9 will give me my negative 18 back. I had 2 x's, I took 1 away, so I have 1 x left. For the next term, I have to ask, negative 2 times what will give me a negative 4? The answer is a positive 2. Negative 2 times positive 2 will give me my negative 4. There's no x's left in that last term, and we have to set it equal to 0. So now we have to solve, so we set each factor equal to 0. Negative 2x is equal to 0, and 9x plus 2 is equal to 0. The inverse of multiplying by -2 is dividing by -2. 0 divided by -2 is -2. On the right side, I do the inverse of addition, which is subtraction. 0 minus 2 is -2. So 9x equals -2. The inverse of multiplying by 9 would be dividing by 9. -2 divided by 9 we will leave as a fraction, -2/9. So my solutions are x equals -2 and x equals -2/9. And I just realized I made a mistake, but we're going to fix it. 0 divided by -2 we said was 0, but I wrote -2 down. I was rushing, so don't make that mistake too. So it is 0. I knew I made that mistake because when I went to go look at my answers, I knew one of the solutions had to be 0 because of the zero product property. Now you're going to get your homework next, and I just want to let you know that the homework, if you read the directions, it says you're going to factor out a greatest common factor and set each factor equal to 0. Don't get confused, it is the same as your notes. The setup is just a little different. Each equation will start off saying f of x equals, for example, like number 10, 6x squared minus 4x. But the directions state, if you read them, that you're going to factor out the greatest common factor, like we did, and then it will tell you to set each factor equal to 0. So essentially, if you would like to replace the f of x with 0, you can rewrite it as 0 equals 6x squared minus 4x. This will look more familiar to your notes, and it might help you with your homework. Don't forget we have a quiz tomorrow on this, and I will be in before school.